For some reason, in the mid-2000s, there was a boom with video games focusing on Roman gladiators. Could have something to do with Ridley Scott's fantastic film, but also could just be that the Roman Empire is always on the minds of men.
How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
3 times a day.
Either way, we had Gladiator Sword of Vengeance, a hack and slash game with a fixed camera perspective, Gladius, a turn-based RPG game, Colosseum Road to Freedom, a gladiator sim game that incorporated some decent RPG elements, and Spartan Total Warrior, a Total War series title with combats like Dynasty Warriors. But it wasn't until recently when I saw Gladiator 2, the sequel to Ridley Scott's 2000 film Gladiator, that theoretically inspired all of these games, that I was reminded of a Gladiator game that I absolutely adored on the PlayStation 2, developed by none other than Capcom of all people. A brilliant title called Shadow of Rome, and in my opinion, it's criminally underrated.
Are you satisfied? Is it really so enjoyable to watch men murder each other like animals?
It's no surprise that so many video games were focused around the gladiatorial games of ancient Rome, especially those under the reign of Julius Caesar, as this was a particularly bloody time in history. But I think the thing that Capcom did that stood out from the rest of the crowd focusing on non-stop violence and combats is that they focused on telling an interesting story surrounding the historical line muttered by a dying Julius Caesar.
Et tu, Brute?
This wasn't just a game about a gladiator going through arena games to appease bloodthirsty civilians, but instead a game that took a relatively deep take of alternative history surrounding the assassination of one of Rome's greatest rulers, and involved real-life individuals from history as well. The game begins just after Caesar is shanked and Rome is in shock over their emperor's passing, and the situation is not helped by the fact that the person wielding the blade is entirely unknown. We play the game as General Marcus Agrippa, and I can't be the only one who thinks he looks like Guts from Berserk. Agrippa is away at a barbarian outpost at the time of Caesar's death, who then rushes back home upon hearing the news. Although when he gets there, he is met with another shock of news. His father is being charged for doing the murder, and also his mother is being sentenced to death as well. Agrippa arrives at his mother's execution and kills all of the guards there and almost frees his mom from restraints, but then she is slain by another Roman general named Decius Brutus, who then beats down Agrippa, straight up bitch slaps him. But before Agrippa could be arrested, he is saved by a masked woman named Claudia. And now a plan is devised between Agrippa, Claudia, and Octavianus, his good friend and nephew of Caesar, to free his father and find out who really killed the emperor. The executioner of Agrippa's father is set to be whoever wins at the upcoming Gladiator games, so Agrippa decides to enter into them as a gladiator and win the games to free his father. Meanwhile, Octavianus is going to sneak around the streets of Rome and gather intel on who was behind the assassination of his uncle, and that's where the game sets itself apart. You take control of Octavianus in these moments, and instead of brutal combat like Agrippa, you play the game as more of a stealth game, hiding in the shadows and using various items to get what you need. The story is full of surprises and it's actually quite in depth. There is over 2 hours of cutscenes in this PS2 game just to give you an idea of how much plot there actually is. The gameplay is split between Agrippa's combat forward approach and Octavianus' stealthy intel gathering, with neither character taking too much of the spotlight before the torch is passed once again.
Agrippa? Son, is that you? And noble Octavianus?
Hi, how are you?
So what got into Japanese game studio Capcom to branch out from titles like Resident Evil and Onimusha to instead make a gladiator combat game set in ancient Rome? Turns out, the game was developed by the same team who made Onimusha 3 and uses the same game engine as that game as well. And after spending a bunch of time going over ancient Japan with that series, they decided to go into another section of history and try their hand at being even more historically accurate than Onimusha's history-based fantasy. Onimusha 3 already pushed push the limits of the PlayStation 2 system, so they really wanted to capitalize on this fantastic engine that they got their hands on. The original idea was for the game to have a branching storyline that changed depending on how the player was at each type of gameplay. A sort of brain versus brawn game, if you will. If the player was excelling at stealth portions of the game, then they would in turn get more levels around stealth. And the same goes for combats. If they were kicking ass in the combat, then they would get more opportunities to do just that. For one reason or another though, this branching system was scrapped for a more linear level-based system that just changed back and forth between the two characters and the game modes. The game was also very theatrical in its presentation. The cutscenes are framed nicely and paced very well, and clearly taking some inspiration from Ridley Scott's 2000 film.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
But not only that, the voice acting is fairly well done. The facial expression animations in the cutscenes were ridiculous at times though. It's hard to really tell the characters' motives when they are constantly giving you a devious smirk and changing their expression 10 times in 30 seconds. The game was revealed in January of 2004 when Capcom announced a game in the works that focused around the assassination of Julius Caesar, and gameplay was shown at E3 of the same year, where they also announced the game would be made just for North American and European markets, something that Japanese developers tend to do from time to time to reach a broader audience. Just look at Konami and Silent Hill. The advertisements for this game were also pretty sick. This magazine ad in Europe had a picture of various weapons that you can use in the game with an arm on the weapons rack too. And I bet that most people didn't realize that meant you can use that arm as a weapon in the game, because by golly you sure can. And by February of 2005, the game reached store shelves across the world. Man, I sure do miss the days when games were announced and released all within about a year's time. Looking at you, Rockstar. But now let's get into what really made this game special though. Yeah, the Roman history, nicely done cutscenes, and the deep storylines are cool and all, but the thing that stands out for me, and I assume most people, is the brutal and visceral gameplay that this game boasts. As stated before, the gameplay is broken up between playing the game as Agrippa and playing as Octavianus. Agrippa is what I remember most about this game. Raw and unfiltered gladiator combat. Agrippa is strong, fast, and gets excited rather than scared to fight strong soldiers in battle.
This must be their best fighter, the one saved for last. I cannot die now!
I really like how Capcom pulled no punches in the arena combat though. You can slice dudes in half, crush their limbs, drop tons of stone on them, amputate arms and heads alike, burn them, chop them, drown them.
Boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it.
But it's not just cool executions. The enemies don't always die from these attacks. They could roll around on the ground in pain or piss themselves on the sandy floor. You can slice off both of a dude's arms, and then when he gets up and stumbles towards you, trying to phantom swing with exposed medullary cavities in a dream, you can pick up his own arm and then throw it right back at his face. You can pick up severed arms and heads and throw them into the crowd as well, earning roars of applause and cheer as you get bonus points called fresh ham. In the arena, the weapon selection is fairly abundant. You get swords, maces, daggers, spears, human arms, shields, and bows of various shapes and sizes. And sometimes when you really get the crowd going, they'll toss you these outlandishly large anime weapons just to decimate the whole arena. There is a downside to the weapons in this game though, and it's probably the biggest gripe that most people have with this game, and that's the durability of them. That's right, weapons can break. And I don't know what kind of blacksmith they got working over in Rome at this time, but these weapons don't last for shit. A giant halberd twice the size of Agrippa only lasts about 10 swings before it's toast. If your weapon does break, don't fret though. There is some decent unarmed combat as well, jabs and heavy punches of course, but let's not overlook the glorious suplex.
You gotta be kidding me! You gotta be kidding me! No, don't do this! The superplex!
But realistically, once you're unarmed, you're just doing what you can to get another weapon in your hands. Most of the time they are scattered about the arena, but sometimes you have to steal one from another fighter. But be careful, if you aren't fast enough, they too can take that weapon. There is also ways to heal mid-fight if you need to. There's sometimes meat, bread, or cheese in the arena to eat, and often when calling on the crowd they would toss down food for you to heal as well. Speaking of the crowd, the Gladiator games are meant to please them, so the better performance that you put on, the happier that they will be, and for some reason, they just have stockpiles of food and weapons in the stands that they are ready to throw down to you. Who the hell carried that thing into the stadium? The points you get for stylish and unique kills are called salvos, and the more salvos that you have, when you raise your arms up to appease the crowd, the better the item is that they toss you. Salvos also carry over for larger rewards throughout the whole game as well, like unique armors and cosmetic items. My favorite being the gorilla suit, which is exactly what you think it is, and instead of Agrippa raising his arms to please the crowd, he instead pounds on his chest like the primate that he is. The Gladiator battles aren't all just copy and paste brawler either. You have arenas with death traps, sometimes death pits, spinning blades, or crushing blocks that you can dance around and use to your advantage to dispatch all the enemies against you. Sometimes you have a partner in these battles and you have to race to destroy statues before the other teams do. Sometimes you have an escort mission, everybody loves those, but each area usually has something unique to offer, making the already varied combat that much better when you're plopped into a battle with spinning helicopter blades in the middle, or fire pits, or ferocious tigers to dance and play around with. There are occasions where you control Agrippa outside of these arena battles, and the combat is a little lacking in these situations. You have less weapons available to you, no environmental interaction, and no bloodthirsty fans tossing you any cheese. Other than hand-to-hand combat, Agrippa's missions also sometimes involve chariot races that are part race and part combat. These were entertaining, but also kind of limiting. The enemy variety paled in comparison to normal combat, and so did the weapon selection and options of attack. A cool way to break the pace, but nothing really to look forward to. The boss fights, however, were really well done. They all offer unique styles and variations to combat flow that is severely underlooked. There is quite a few boss fights, and the way that each one stands out is really amazing. You have giant barbarians, agile archers, fucking tigers and elephants, African warriors, and even other Roman soldiers that you combat throughout the entire game. Some fights are frustrating and challenging, whether the fight is just hard because of the mechanics of the game or the actual character is just a beast. The final fight against Antonius was a bitch, and that guy was absurdly tanky for no reason. Or sometimes the fights were just aggravating due to PS2 jankiness, but at least you can combat the jankiness with some cheese of your own, like stun locking bosses with a bow and arrow. But most of the fights were enjoyable for sure. All in all, the arena combat as Agrippa is what made this game so memorable. This game was gorier than Manhunt was, but since you got some historical storytelling with it, all of it is forgiven. You can take a guy's head and cheer to the crowd with it. That's some Daniel Lamb shit, but this game didn't get any restrictions anywhere, oddly enough. But there is also another side of the coin here with the gameplay. Gameplay as Octavianus was nothing like Agrippa's in any way. The aspects of Octavianus's gameplay weren't as riveting or exciting. In fact, they were frustratingly boring and tedious at certain points. But the focus on expanding the narrative and lore of the game was well worth the change of pace in my opinion. The game could have easily just been non-stop action with Agrippa tearing dudes apart, but we wouldn't have gotten any sort of plot if that were the case, and I'm a sucker for a good plot. These sections with Octavianus focus around adventure and stealth, going all around Rome and trying to hear secrets and gather information on the assassination of Caesar. And it's alright. For a game you think is focused solely on gory combat, the stealth is actually pretty well done. But for a game, if you're expecting some riveting stealth gameplay, it's pretty simple in those regards. The controls are kinda clunky and certain objectives can be a little aggravating, like when you have to sneak around restricted areas with guards and they can just kill you with one blow, or nosy ass civilians can alert the guards as well, essentially killing you. Sometimes you get the opportunity to talk your way out of situations depending on where you're at and when you get caught. You can also hide in giant vases or use disguises to make things a little bit easier. or simply do some sneak attacks to knock a guard unconscious. But they aren't always possible, and sneaking around with odd camera and character controls can get a little tedious. I do like the variety of items that you can use as Octavianus though. You can use frogs or mice to scare maids out of certain areas, or apples or stones to distract people or piss off a horse attached to a cart, or banana peels, which are as comically hilarious as one would assume they'd be. I also like how Octavianus hides his weapons behind his back as he's trying to sneak up on an enemy. It's such a small little detail that they didn't really have to add, but it was entertaining to me to see him just nonchalantly trying to get close to a guard with a honeypot behind his back.
Hey! Who are you?
Octavianus has some skills in deception though, for sure. There's a part where he pretends to be a maid and it's just straight up a voice actor switch, and it's so jarring, but it made me laugh out loud when I played this again.
Mecanus! Antonius calls for you!
I will admit, I spent most of the time playing as Octavianus just wishing I can get back into the arena as Agrippa. But that's not a testament to how bad these sections were, but instead a testament to how good the brawling sections were.
Damn it. Why Octavianus?
There was no challenge or real creativity when controlling Octavianus, just rudimentary stealth and walking, lots of walking. But we did it for the story, the fun alternate history take on one of the most infamous assassinations of all time.
Et tu, Brute. What? Are you remembering something?
No, but, and you too, Brutus. That indicates that there was more than one murderer, including a certain Brutus, who Caesar would never have expected to turn his back on him.
Et tu, Brute? Am I using that right?
After talking about how great the story is in this game, I thought I'd do a quick rundown here. Definitely not a deep dive into this game's plot, more of a Cliff's Notes version, but still spoilers ahead if you do care. So the game starts as we went over earlier. Julius Caesar gets murked and Agrippa's father is framed for the murder. Caesar's supposed heir is Marcus Antonius, and he is placed in charge. Agrippa rushes back to Rome to find out his father and mother are both up for execution, arriving just in time to save his mother from the guards about to kill her, only for her to get killed by General Decius Brutus anyway. But before Brutus can arrest Agrippa, he is saved by a woman named Claudia, a female gladiator, who whisks him and Octavianus up and brings them to safety. Claudia informs Agrippa that there will be gladiatorial games held in remembrance of Caesar, and the winner of these games becomes the executioner for Agrippa's father. Agrippa decides to join the games as a gladiator in order to become the victor and spare his father's life. Claudia's brother Sextus runs a gladiator training camp and can get Agrippa into the games easily. And meanwhile, Octavianus is to remain in Rome and investigate the true murderer of his uncle, Julius Caesar. Before they depart, they sneak into the prison where Agrippa's father is being held to speak with him. He tells the boys that he heard Caesar say the famous lines of "Et tu, Brute?" after he was stabbed, giving them a lead of sorts, or, well, Octavianus a lead. Agrippa just goes chopping along through the games, and Octavianus is on the tail of Marcus Brutus, the protege of Cicero, the head of the Senate. On his investigations, he comes across Cicero stabbed in his office, and in his dying breath, he reveals to Octavianus that a group of conspirators are responsible for the emperor's death, and Agrippa's father is not the real killer. Marcus Brutus is a member of the group, but he is not the one who did the killing. Octavianus decides to confront Marcus, but when he finds him, he's erratic and surrounded by multiple slain senators. He tells Octavianus that another Brutus in the group is killing off all the other members, but he does not say who it is. Back over to Agrippa, he and Claudia are getting closer. Claudia reveals to him that her and Sextus are not true siblings, but instead Sextus saved her as a child after her family was killed by a Roman soldier. And the true identity of Sextus is the son of Pompeius, who was killed in battle by Caesar, and he is on a mission to kill Octavianus as he is the last blood relative of Caesar, and will use that to his advantage for his conquest of Rome. Later on, Sextus confronts Octavianus and attempts to kill him, but before he is able, Claudia steps in to save him, and Octavianus runs off to try to get more information from Marcus. When we get to Marcus, he stumbles upon him getting stabbed by none other than Decius Brutus. Who would have guessed? But even if he still didn't figure it out, Marcus tells him that Decius was the Brutus of the group that is killing everyone.
So, the other Brutus is...
Yes, Decius Brutus. He took advantage of us.
With this information, as well as a scroll in Caesar's handwriting that details that Antonius is not his choice of successor for Rome, he goes to Maecenas, the right hand of Caesar and secretary to now Emperor Antonius, who then promptly arrests Octavianus for interfering with the gladiatorial games that he's throwing. Meanwhile, in the finale of the games, Agrippa is facing off against Decius, the murderer of, well, a lot of people at this point, but most importantly to Agrippa, his mother. Decius gets the best of Agrippa yet again, but before he can kill him once and for all, Maecenas arrives and announces the return of Julius Caesar. He explains to the crowd that the man killed before was a decoy, as Caesar was privy to the plot against his life, announcing that the murder was carried out by Decius Brutus and not Agrippa's father. Caesar addresses Antonius directly afterwards and tells him that he did not choose him as a successor, which Antonius admits he conspired to have Caesar killed once he found out that he was not his heir.
Why was I not named as your successor?
Maecenas announces the true heir to Caesar is who stands in front of them right now. It was Octavianus in disguise. Caesar still is dead, but the rightful heir has been already accepted by the people, and more importantly, the truth is out about who killed Caesar and why. Antonius is furious and orders Decius to kill them all, but Agrippa steps in and protects them, finally defeating the murderer Brutus.
I am a genius. The best general that ever lived.
Antonius decides to step down and handle Agrippa himself, but he too is struck down, but not killed yet. Instead, he is arrested by the guards. And as all of this is happening, Octavius taking his duty as emperor, Maecenas is pleased at Antonius's capture, and Agrippa's just happy to have saved his father. While this is happening, Rome is attacked from the sea. Sextus is leading an attack on Rome as he feels he is the true heir to the land, and his first course of action is to free Antonius, as he and his men will support Sextus's rise to power. There is a battle of Sextus's men and the guards of Rome, and in the chaos, an archer draws back and aims at Agrippa, while his back is turned, and before he is struck, his father dives in front of the arrow, saving him. He tells Agrippa to leave him and hunt down Antonius for justice of Rome. On the way, they run into Sextus. He tells them he is fulfilling his father's dying wish of conquering Rome, and since Agrippa is in his way, he also must die. At the end of their fight, Agrippa is just trying to get Sextus to surrender, and Claudia is tending to her wounded brother. And all of a sudden, Antonius starts firing a barrage of fire attacks on the city. One of the projectiles hits a tower and causes it to collapse. Sextus shoves Claudia out of the way, saving her, but leaving himself to be crushed by this falling tower.
Claudia.
Claudia mourns her fallen brother, but now it's time for Agrippa and Octavianus, the new emperor of Rome, to take down Antonius once and for all. The final battle of the game mirrors the real-life battle of Actium, where the naval fleet under Octavianus, led by General Marcus Agrippa, faces off against Marcus Antonius in the year 31 BC. And in this game, after Agrippa defeats Antonius, just like in the real battle, Antonius commits suicide by jumping off of his ship. Word of his death traveled to his wife Cleopatra as well, which caused her to commit suicide too. After this battle, Octavianus promises to rule Rome peacefully, fulfilling Pax Romana, the dreams of his uncle, and Agrippa says that he will do whatever he can to help. Claudia leaves Rome after mourning the death of Sextus, and Agrippa asks her to please return to Rome one day, which she just responds with a smile.
Okay.
There was a lot of setup in this game that teased the sequel. Throughout the game, there are two girls who are working with and giving information to both Sextus and Antonius, named Iris and Charmaine. These girls claim that they are messengers for a mistress who is not named, but it's most likely Cleopatra. They are the ones who let Antonius know Octavianus is the true heir to Caesar, and they also have Sextus attempt to kill Octavianus because of this, in exchange for their help in his campaign against Rome. And after the final scene, they are heard talking about how this is the end of the beginning, likely going to report back to the powers that be in Egypt.
Iris, are you ready? Yes. We must tell the Great One that we have reached the end of the beginning.
This, combined with Claudia leaving to who knows where after Sextus dies, just sets up the game to be larger scale in a sequel, and perhaps dive into some Egyptian history as well. Executive producer of the game Kaiji Inafune loved this game so much that he already ordered the sequel to be made before its release, so they likely had an idea of what story they were going to tell and where they were going to go with it. But unfortunately, sales for this game were just not good. In the same timeline of this game, there were some bangers released to the market, like Resident Evil 4, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, Gran Turismo 4, and even on the very same day, Knights of the Old Republic 2. And it's not just the flood of very good games hitting the market that drowned this game out. When it released, it only hit number 5 on the sales charts for that week. This game wasn't even outselling games that have been out for months the week of its release, which is not good. Capcom labeled this game a failure, and all that work that was being done on a sequel was immediately scrapped. The great brutal combat feel and general gameplay loop the team made wasn't a complete loss though, as the game's bones and structure were transformed into another lovely title called Dead Rising. So if you were thinking this game looked a little familiar while watching this video, that's probably why. Dead Rising is Shadow of Rome 2, essentially. It's kinda sad, but also it's nice that we got Dead Rising. There's a ton of people who love that game, much more so than those who would have potentially loved a Shadow of Rome 2. So I think Capcom definitely made the smarter business decision, but at the same time, what they are able to do with storytelling and gameplay is amazing, and it would have been sick to see them dive into some Egyptian history in the next game. Maybe one day we'll get a remaster for this game and in turn get the long-awaited sequel, but I'm not too hopeful on that idea. Although I did say the same thing in my Silent Hill 2 video from years ago, and look at us now, we got a pretty sick remaster. So maybe I'm speaking to someone out there in the void, and I hope they're listening. But before we depart, I do want to give a shout out to my patrons and YouTube members for holding it down. Doc Schwinn, Kid Kingpin, Not Much, Zachary Parkerson, Anonymous Starkweather, Ben Stevens, Yay Man, Potty, Kenneth Butler, 10 Inches Soft, Ethan Carpenter, Matthew Taylor, Nick the Brosa, Fremdite, Nico Mendez, Dylan Klink, Frankie Hammer, Peanutso Holland, Grizzly Wizzly, Sexy Pickles, Forgem Nas, Shotgun Minister, AC, Dogu Kekekson, and Pablo Roki. As always, thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Peace.